Now, how should that logic look like in the shopping list reducer? First of all, we got two new cases. That's the simple part. The first case is that in the shopping list actions, we encounter the update ingredient action. Whoops, update ingredient uppercase though, the string identifier. The second case which we need is the delete ingredient case. Now, in both cases, we need to return a new object which will reflect our new state. So far, so simple. Now we need to update that state. And let's start with updating ingredients. As always, you should copy your existing state first and then overwrite ingredients, because that is what we work with here, with a new array. And that new array will basically be the old ingredients array where we edited one ingredient. So that requires a bit more logic. Let's write it here above the return statement. First of all, let's get that one ingredient that we want to edit. So I'll get it here. My ingredient is equal to state. That's my old state, right? That's the state I'm getting as an argument. So it's the previous state before we updated it now. So state, their ingredients, and then we can simply access the index because we get the index as part of our action payload, right? So action payload here will be indexed or will have an index. So that's the ingredient I want to edit. But remember that we always have to edit data immutably here. So simply setting ingredient amount equal to action payload ingredient amount would be incorrect, because that would edit the old state's object or data stored in that old state object. And that is not allowed and absolutely not the pattern NGRX wants you to use. Instead, we should create a copy, and I'll name this updated ingredient, which is an object because ingredient is an object, where I copy the old ingredient. So I copy the name and the amount. And then I know that my action payload also has an ingredient, right? Because I set it up here when I define the types of data I get here. So I have an ingredient here as well. And therefore I can simply just copy action payload ingredient, because that is an ingredient. And this ingredient I get here has, of course, the same properties as the ingredient I'm copying. So essentially, I'm copying the old ingredient's properties to then overwrite them here. Obviously, we could therefore not copy this and simply just spread our incoming ingredient data into this new object. But for cases where, for example, you have an ID on that existing ingredient which you don't want to overwrite, it would make sense to copy all the old data so that you keep things like an ID or anything else that doesn't need to be overwritten, and then you just overwrite what needs to be overwritten. Here we actually overwrite everything, but for demo purposes and to understand this general pattern, I still like copying it first and then changing what needs to be changed. Now that's the updated ingredient, but we need an array of, well, the old ingredients and then this updated ingredient being replaced. So for this, I'll add a new constant, updated ingredients, so plural, where I copy all my old state ingredients. So I copy the ingredient elements from my old state. So the array, the updated ingredients array, is now a new array. It's not the array in the old state, it's just a new array with the data of the old state's array. So updated ingredients is therefore an array I can safely edit. So updated ingredients can be edited by selecting the index where we want to update the ingredient with the help of action payload index, and then assigning a new element or overwriting the existing element at this index with a new element. And that new element is, of course, the updated ingredient. So I'm replacing the old element with that index in the copied updated ingredients array with the copied updated ingredient. And now updated ingredients is an array of ingredients where we overwrote one ingredient, and that was the ingredient that has to be edited. And therefore now the ingredients I set here in the state I return is simply my updated ingredients array. So that's the logic for updating an ingredient. Might look like a lot of work, but in the end, this just enforces this immutable logic. And whilst this might look strange at first, it really is a good pattern that will prevent unexpected bugs where you accidentally added some old state too early and therefore your NGRX stored state gets out of sync with your rest of the application state that, well, doesn't expect such immutable mutations. So therefore, always edit your data immutably, like we do it here, return a new state, and if you need to edit something inside of that state, copy it first and then edit the copy. Now, of course, we also delete ingredients, and there we also return a copy of the old state, and then we set ingredients equal to a new array. And just as before, this needs to be an array of ingredients where we basically have all the old ingredients, but we removed one. And this is relatively easy to do. You simply set ingredients equal to state ingredients filter. Now, filter will always return a new array, so it will automatically give us a copy. And filter is a function built into JavaScript that will take an array, run a certain function which you pass in as an argument on every element in the array. And if your function, which you pass into filter, which we'll do in a second, if that function returns true, then the element for which it's executing this will be part of that new array filter returns. Otherwise, it will not. So the function we have to pass to filter is a function that runs on every element in the array you call filter on, so on every ingredient. And this function will automatically receive every element, therefore. Hence, we can name it ingredient here or just IG. And then I use an arrow function, and this is now my function body here. And in there, we have to return true or false, deciding whether we want to keep that ingredient we're currently looking at. And again, this will run for every ingredient in that array or not. And I want to keep my ingredient if its index is not equal to the index we're looking for here, so which is part of our action payload. And the good thing is, the filter function, or the function we pass to filter, does not just give us every element for which it executes, but also the index of every element. So we also get the IG index, or whatever you want to call it. So we get two arguments by default. That is how filter works, how this built-in function works. It's not Angular, this is vanilla JavaScript. We get the element for which the function runs, so every element in the ingredients array, and then always the current index of the element we're looking at. And I want to return true for every element where the index is not equal to the index we're looking for. Because if I return true, then the element will be kept. If I return false, it will be filtered out. And I only want to filter out one element, and that is the element with the index we're trying to delete. So I return IG index not equal to action payload. And action payload already is the index for this action right here. It's already a number. So that is what I'm comparing. So if my action payload, if the index I'm getting is equal to the index I'm currently looking at, then this is the element I want to remove. And therefore I have to return false, which is what happens here, so that this is not included in the new array filter returns. So that was, again, a lot of talking. Let's now make sure that this also gets dispatched. For that, let's first of all go to the shopping edit component. We already dispatched our own action for adding an ingredient. Let's now also do the same for updating it. So now we can call this store dispatch new shopping list actions dot update ingredient. And there we need to pass in an object which has an index property, which should be the index of the element we want to remove. And we get this here with this edited item index. And we also have to pass in the new ingredient which we want to use instead, and that is the new ingredient argument here. So this dispatches the update ingredient action. Now we can also delete ingredients, and there we currently call this shopping list service delete ingredient. Let's get rid of this as well, and let's use the store instead and dispatch a new shopping list actions delete ingredient action, where we now also need to include the index of the element we want to remove, and that is the this edited item index here. So let's dispatch this as well. Let's give this a try. If we go back to the application and I select tomatoes and I delete this, they're gone. So this looks pretty good. If I reload, they're of course back. This is how this works. I mentioned that your current state stored in your application would be lost if you refresh, and therefore our update of course also is lost. We didn't save this change to a server, but it works. Now, does updating work? If I change the amount to 10 here, looks pretty good. If I remove a S, also looks pretty good. Though I'm also back to 5 then, right? So let me show this again. I update this to 10. Now I lost the Apple S. If I update that again and remove the S, something is going wrong, because you might see that if I click on this, actually the old state is loaded. Apples and the amount. It's not loading the state we're seeing down there. So updating only partly works. Let's see what's wrong here.